If WWE's Big Four pay-per-views are the Beatles, Survivor Series is definitely Ringo. While the mere mention evokes nostalgic feelings, it generally gets no respect and is seen as the most expendable of the quartet. Though it did have the good sense not to marry King of the Ring, which would have driven an irreparable wedge through the band. That being said though, Survivor Series is still viewed as tangibly inferior to the Manias, Rumbles and Slams that share the calendar. Other than like the first two Survivor Series back in the 80s, the event just doesn't really stand up on the gimmick alone. In fact, by the fifth installment of the Survivor Series in 1991, the tentpole event had turned into an infomercial. No, really. The entire purpose of the 1991 card, which cost about $30 American to purchase because, you know, at that time there was no WWF network, was to promote a supplementary pay-per-view the following week. That made the card that we're about to discuss feel about Yellow Submarine soundtrack levels of inessential. The 1991 Survivor Series is one of the worst shows ever. I've spoken with several American wrestling fans and they've all told me the same thing. I can't understand your accent. They've also told me that at one time Survivor Series was a crucial part of Thanksgiving, along with turkey dinners, American football, undesirable relatives and screwing Jim Crockett Jr. over. Though, through the early years, Survivor Series was quite novel. In a time before the Monday Night Wars made name wrestler versus name wrestler matchups more commonplace on TV, a 5-on-5 elimination match was a rare occasion in which so many stars, not to mention Dangerous Danny Davis, would all occupy the same ring. Survivor Series never really had stakes or anything. It was just a parade of all the big stars, you know, mishmashing blow-offs with setups of new rivalries. Those events were nonetheless fairly low energy affairs, just mindless mayhem to gorge on while you eat your pumpkin pie. Mindless as the cards may have been, those first two Survivor Series in 1987 and 1988 were pretty great on the whole, and rank among the WWF's finest golden age pay-per-views. 1989 was a notch below though, as something was kind of lost in the shift from 5-man teams to 4. 1990 meanwhile ran the gamut, and when I say ran the gamut, I mean the debuting Undertaker thankfully proved great enough to offset an insipid grand finale, Sergeant Slaughter's 4-minute entrance promo, and Eddie Guerrero's older brother dressed as a rejected fast food mascot. There's a reason Lie, Cheat and Gobble never made it to a t-shirt. Speaking of The Undertaker, he, not a turkey, was to be the centerpiece of the 5th annual Survivor Series, emanating from Detroit's Joe Louis Arena. And this Survivor Series was going to be a little different than those which preceded it. For one thing, Survivor Series was on a Wednesday. This was Thanksgiving Eve instead of the actual holiday. I can only assume somebody ribbed Vince by telling him that WCW was holding a pay-per-view on that Wednesday night, and well, obviously he was like, over my suspiciously muscular dead body. Smart move though, putting it on Turkey Day Eve. That way, the only competition WWF had is the families travelling overnight to relatives' houses and college kids getting plastered drunk at the local bar. Record business incoming, surely, come on! Another change was that Survivor Series was going to have a non-elimination match for the first time ever, thus breaking the format a tad, but a little bit more on that in a bit. The biggest change, however, was the state of the WWF. While business was booming between 1987 and 1990, the 1991 show had a bit of a dark cloud hovering overhead. You know, seeing as some people got this crazy idea that because some doctor associated with the WWF got convicted for steroid distribution, that somehow meant the muscle-bound star of the show might be loaded up with enough anabolics to give Godzilla kidney failure. And because that star of the show looked like the biggest liar red and yellow pants on fire while downplaying his own steroid use on national television, the WWF as a whole suddenly felt like a real den of iniquities, one whose audience has begun eroding in lockstep with all those heavyweight physiques. Given the WWF's ongoing spiral, it's quite eerily on the nose that the Survivor Series subheader invokes death. Dubbed the Gravest Challenge, Survivor Series' biggest match was for the WWF Championship, with Hulk Hogan putting the gold on the line against a man more than 11 years his junior, the 26-year-old Undertaker. Again, a singles match is an unusual attraction for Survivor Series of the day, but otherwise, no issues here. Also unusual was the fact that the teams in the elimination bouts don't have any special unifying names. Gone are the days of the Hulkamaniacs, the Heenan family, the Vipers, the B-Sharps, and we're left with quartets that lack catchy handles. Not on my watch though. No, I insist that these teams have names. Believe me, there isn't a horrible wrestling show that I can't make much worse. In one high-profile bout, the disastrously venomous auditors, that's Jake Roberts, IRS, and the Natural Disasters, take on Scissors, Spikes, and Stolen Caskets, consisting of Sid Justice, the Big Boss Man, and the Legion of Doom. So far, so adequate. They live on bizarre breadsticks and go to hell Goldberg, which is Roddy Piper, Bret Hart, Davey Boy Smith, and Virgil, tangle with the four horsemen of alimony, alleged misappropriation of funds, electrocution, and, well, the Warlord, which is Ric Flair, Ted DiBiase, the Mountie, and, the Warlord. In a match consisting of 4 tag teams, making men disappear through camouflage and refusing to lay down, which is the Rockers and the Bushwhackers, square off with the nastiest side of the Von Wagner family. The Nasty Boys, Von Wagner's dad, and, well, the other one. In a match that could main event almost any rec centre in Iowa, Patriots putting up with Fritz's Bull, which is Jim Duggan, Sergeant Slaughter, El Matador, and the Texas Tornado, battle the chain-swinging, chaw-spitting, sword-wielding, old country way Colonel Mustafa, Hercules, Skinner, and the Berzerker, known in other circles as the Southwest Connecticut Facial Hair Authority. Admittedly, with so many territorial-era stars beginning to age out, and there being diminishing pipelines for which to pluck young, ripened wrestlers, the roster is a tad less impressive than it has been in previous years. But wait, Sid Justice is injured. He's messed up his elbow, so he'll have to miss Survivor Series. Well, his team is going to need a new captain then. Someone to lead the charge against the team captained by Jake the Snake Roberts, the very man who attacked Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth with a cobra at their wedding in August. Wait a darn minute here. Savage could be the captain. Sure, he was retired by Warrior at WrestleMania 7, but, you know, wrestling retirements are like the municipal laws in the NXT parking lot, constantly broken. Savage is the ideal replacement for Sid, because he can get bloody revenge on Jake. It makes sense. And look, WWF's actually continuing the angle by having Jake attack Savage with a live cobra again. Actually, forget that, don't look, because the snake's actually snapping into Match's arm like a Slim Jim. For those who say Jon Moxley bleeds too much, I say that until Rey Fenix attacks him with a live and literal puma. All Mox can nick his forehead with microscopic blades to his heart's content. But I digress. Inserting Savage into the match is a foregone conclusion now. Otherwise, why would you have Jake continue the assault to Savage in the run-up to Survivor Series? It has to be because Savage is going to be reinstated in time for Survivor Series so that he can personally de-venomize Jake in front of a large pay-per-view audience. In fact, here comes old President Jack Tunney now to kick off Survivor Series to make the big announcement. This will give Survivor Series the shot in the giblets that it so desperately needs. Right. So that's not what Tunney said. Tunney said that Roberts has been pulled from his match due to attacking another human being with a venomous snake. Which, mind you, now establishes the precedent that attempted murder can cost you a pay-per-view payoff. Mind you, a year earlier when Rick Rude legitimately quit the WWF, he was written out with an indefinite suspension for, wait for it, making disparaging comments about the boss man's mother. You know, I'm starting to think that Jack Tunney wasn't a very good president. But Tunney goes on. The now Jakeless match becomes 3-on-3, pitting Bossman and the Legion of Doom against IRS and the Disasters. And that's probably for the best that Savage wasn't factored in, because Lord knows that the Bossman would have scoffed at his snake bite and said, you know, like, big deal. Do you know what Rick Rude called my mother? Or something like that. Hang on. Tunney's not done though. Turns out Jake and Savage will have a match. Get in 6 nights from now at a special supplementary pay-per-view called This Tuesday in Texas, which took place in Texas. Yes, the WWF was using one of their big 4 pay-per-views to promote an immediate sequel, rather than reward those that had already sunk money into this tentpole event. Fans who bought the show expected Savage to be added on a formality were sorely disappointed. Additionally, the subtraction of Roberts at the start of the show, well, that was one hell of a bait and switch. And that is why cards subject to change was invented. As for the actual Survivor Series itself, more than 17,000 fans have packed the Joe Louis Arena to the tune of 300,000 pay-per-view buys, the lowest for any Survivor Series so far. Hopefully, just as many tune in to watch the hastily concocted Tuesday show to see Jake vs Savage actually transpire, which, as long as neither man insults the other's mother, should happen. As for what actually did transpire in Detroit, well, let's run it down. We begin with what looks like the best match on paper between Flair's team and Piper's team, with Flair, Bret, DiBiase and Bulldog involved. The actual wrestling should be strong. Plus, Flair and Piper are both heat-seeking artists in the midst of a compelling feud, so this bout has got a lot going for it. Even better though, they're giving this one some time. Every match in 1990 was absurdly fast, with only one of them exceeding 15 minutes. Here, the first elimination doesn't occur until 11 minutes in, when Slick Rick uses a little bit of cheeky chancery to eliminate the Bulldog. So far, you know, this is lots of fun. It continues to be fun when Piper manages to eliminate the much larger Warlord at the 17-minute mark. I complained about dropping Savage and Roberts from Survivor Series for reasons of carnivorous greed, but this opening match it's more than making up for it. You know, we are 22 minutes in, and there's still only 2 eliminations. Are we going to top the 40-minute mark on this one? They certainly have the guys to pull it off, but sadly no. I bet you're asking, why did the bell just ring while everybody was brawling in the ring? Did they just disqualify everybody for fighting? No, no, no. That would be stupid. Instead, they disqualified everybody except for Flair, because he got knocked out to the outside during the 6-man slugfest. Thus, the 5 guys remaining inside the ring were all disqualified. The sole survivor due to a technicality is Ric Flair. You know what that's like? That's like having an enjoyable Royal Rumble for about 20 minutes with all sorts of fun spots. Then Vince just walks out and calls the rest of the match off and awards the win to Brock Lesnar because, well, Brock got him a nice fruit basket. Remember, people without illegal cable boxes were compelled to spend $30 on this piece of crap. But all's not lost. Here comes Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. Not to wrestle on this godforsaken pay-per-view, mind you. No. Savage is here to do a promo/commercial for his upcoming match with Jake. Because in case you forgot, you need to buy Tuesday's show. Back to Wednesday's show, which is filled with much woe. The next match is Duggan, Slaughter, Santana, and Von Erich against Sheiky Baby, Berzerker, Hercules, and Skinner, in an attempt to set the Guinness World Record for most needlessly repackaged aging wrestlers in one ring. Sadly, Saba Simba and Repo Man have apparently missed their flights for this match. The high point of the match is getting to hear Colonel Mustafa's criminally underrated, uber sinister theme music. Genuinely, it's on Spotify. Go and have a listen straight after this. Then it was all downhill from there. Listen, we all love Sheiky, but his mobility was way on the wrong side of prime here. Only Santana had the capability and the inclination to look presentable in this one, as slow and clunky brawling filled the otherwise 14 minutes. The match ended up being a clean sweep for the babyfaces, culminating in Duggan wiping out Berzerker. Seriously, do not try to operate any motor vehicle or heavy machinery after viewing this match. In fact, it's quite possible that Vince and company used this match to lull everybody into some Inception style coma dreamland in order to plant the subliminal thought in all of us to buy this Tuesday in Texas. It wouldn't be the only time Christopher Nolan ripped off WWE though. Memento, for instance, was inspired by Vince's inability to remember what he booked 3 weeks ago. Hence the 800 rematches. To pull this plane out of its tailspin, here's Jake to cut one of his patented dark and foreboding promos, all while dressed like a high school English teacher from 1981 that would have a cheeky wee smoke out the back with a riff-raff. So far, it's the best thing at Survivor Series, simply on the merit that it doesn't end with 5 guys getting disqualified for punching each other. Wrestling! Jake plugs the match with Savage, which, all together now, by Tuesday's show! Come on! Next is the main event. What, really? The main event? Yep. Hogan vs Undertaker is slotted third, possibly because Thanksgiving's dinner is served early at the Hogan abode, and he's got a red eye to catch. This match is, of course, historic, seeing as it marks the Undertaker's first championship win, coming just 1 year after the character's debut. It's also notable for the sentiment of the crowd, which is about 60 to 65% in favour of the Phenom. As noted earlier, Hogan was kind of tarnished for the whole "I only took steroids a couple of times" mea culpa, which could be true if you count the 70s, 80s and 90s as those 3 times. Crowd reaction is beginning to reflect a severe downgrade for Hogan's once infallible aura, as the scandal is likely coupled with general Hulk fatigue. At this point, he has been on top for 8 whole years. No doubt this is one of the most significant WWE title matches in history, a moment that signified one young star becoming a made man, while simultaneously underlining an aging legend's fall from grace. But while the match is historic for a number of reasons, it's also boring. Between Hogan's overly light working style and Undertaker relying more on slowed down theatrics in this period, the match could only resemble a later Taker classic if you watched it at like 1.5 speed. Oh yep, and Hogan immediately hulked up 2 seconds after being hit with a tombstone. It was like Paul Bearer's comical look of horror worth Hogan immediately no-selling the deadliest finisher in 1991 WWF. Almost. But fear not, for justice ultimately prevails. Flair comes out with a chair, allowing Undertaker to tombstone Hogan onto his own thigh instead of a chair, which apparently jammed Hogan's neck by accident, resulting in Undertaker winning the belt. This made seemingly 3 out of every 5 fans at the Joe Louis Arena happy, based on my ear's estimation anyway. But did the finish make them happy enough to see a rematch? During a lengthy intermission session filled with assorted promos, a disgusted Mean Gene interviewed Jack Tunney to ask him the question on the tip of everybody's tongue. Why did you book Savage vs Jack for an unrelated pay-per-view, you expressionless, money-grabbing bastard? No, wait. He actually asked him if he was going to do something about the finish of the WWF title match that just took place. And Tunney, well, he proposed a solution. Taker would give Hogan an immediate rematch at this Tuesday in Texas. You know, in hindsight, it's a good thing that the world title match did conveniently end with controversy, because otherwise, what in the hell else was Tunney going to book for this Insta show? Was he really going to lie in wait for like Greg Valentine and Pat Tanaka to have a backstage argument over Lord Palmerston and Pitt the Elder, and then burst through the wall like the world's blandest Kool-Aid man to ask him if they had any plans for Tuesday? Speaking of Tuesday, by Tuesday's show! Speaking of bland, Survivor Series 91 has officially entered afterthought territory, with Hogan and Taker, Flair and Piper, and Savage and Jake, the only 3 feuds that really mean anything at this point, have been accounted for already. They couldn't end with Hogan Taker because they had to announce the rematch during intermission. They couldn't end with Savage and Jake because they didn't wrestle here. And they couldn't end with Flair and Piper because, well, who's going to end the pay-per-view with 5 simultaneous disqualifications? Did Russo book this show? You can't end the show with any of the 3 feuds that actually matter. It's the Legion of Doom and mostly mid-carders from here. But next up is the Rockers and the Bushwhackers versus the Nasty Boys and the Beverly Brothers in a match that Dave Meltzer had the audacity to give 3.5 stars. People who argue with Dave about star ratings on Twitter, or X as it's now called, have about as productive of a life as tumble dryer lint. But 3.5 stars for this match? Maybe it was just an act of holiday charity on Dave's part, I don't know. The match isn't technically bad or anything, it's just dull for most of its 23-minute duration, and the crowd's barely invested because they've just done seeing the headline bout. And maybe this was the second part of the Inception style scheme that Vince has got, and they programmed Dave to go 2 stars higher than they normally would have? It's baffling. One person who was definitely out to lunch was Gorilla Monsoon. Late in the match, Shawn Michaels was pinned after a Marty Jannetty miscue, which was the moment that Michaels began his heel turn and, ultimately, beneficial solo run. Low-key historic moment here, and just a shame that Monsoon sadly ruined it. Monsoon somehow misses Michaels getting pinned by Brian Knobbs, so when Shawn yells at Marty for screwing up before leaving ringside, an irate Monsoon interprets this as an angry Michaels walking out on his partner and taking an intentional count-out loss. And that is why Vince yells at everyone on their headset and tells them what to say. Or maybe, I don't know. Maybe Vince fell into another Inception-like coma during the match himself, but only God knows. Either way, Monsoon had no clue what had happened here, and nobody bothered to correct him. The Nasties and Blake Beverly survived shortly after, winning a 23-minute match that could have really been about 9 or 10. At least Monsoon was paying attention at this time. Finally, it's Bossman and the Legion of Doom battling IRS and the Disasters, in a match that really has no reason to exist, let alone main event a Big Four pay-per-view. Now, with all due respect to the wrestlers involved, it's a pure house show filler bout. Bossman gets pinned after a briefcase shot, Typhoon gets pinned after IRS accidentally hits him with the case, Quake walks out in frustration after IRS's error, and after a tepid rest hold segment, Legion of Doom finishes Schyster with a doomsday device. If you missed it while pre-stuffing the turkey, you missed absolutely nothing. So that was Survivor Series. The consensus best match ended with multiple DQs. The rest of the cards seemed to exist only to fulfill some sort of morbid contractual obligation, and a gross amount of time was spent convincing the home viewer to buy another pay-per-view the following week. As for This Tuesday in Texas, or T-Tit as the cool kids call it, the show wound up doing less than half of Survivor Series buys and was considered a major flop. Now, the Savage and Jake match, complete with its nuclear aftermath, is absolutely worth a look. And Hogan and Taker had another controversial match that was responsible for setting up the awesome 1992 Royal Rumble. But fat lot of good that did for an audience that was little more apt to clutch its wallet tightly the second time around. I suppose not enough people, well, bought Tuesday's show. The 1991 Survivor Series was a show that didn't even try. It was a transparent cash grab that incessantly promoted another transparent cash grab, and pretty much, well, got the deserved result. Survivor Series went from being a Thanksgiving tradition to giving its once loyal audience very little to be thankful for.